You stand in a vast hall. The air is thick with the scent of aged papyrus and the quiet hum of scholarly pursuits. Imagine countless scrolls lining wooden shelves, each one a window into a universe of thought. This was the ancient world's treasure, a dazzling collection of human wisdom, meticulously gathered over centuries. Libraries like Alexandria were not just buildings. They were living, breathing monuments to discovery, science, and philosophy. But imagine then the horror. The smoke, the flames, the agonizing crackle as entire civilizations of knowledge turned to ash. What was truly lost in those devastating fires? Journey with us now into the hushed ruins and echoing chambers of history, to confront the profound tragedy of the libraries that burned. The profound tragedy of libraries that burned often overshadows the magnificent dawn of these very repositories, the initial blossoming of human endeavor to collect and safeguard knowledge. To truly grasp the magnitude of what was lost, you must first journey to where it all began, to the very first attempts by humanity to gather the threads of wisdom into a coherent tapestry. Travel with me now, not to the Greek or Roman worlds you might first imagine, but much further back to the sun-baked plains of Mesopotamia. Here, amidst the Fertile Crescent, you walk through the ancient city of Nineveh, in what is modern-day Iraq. The air is dry and carries the faint scent of dust and baked earth. You step into the grand palace of King Ashurbanipal, an Assyrian monarch who reigned in the 7th century before the Common Era. This is not just a palace. It is a meticulously organized center of learning, housing what is often considered the world's first systematically collected library. As you enter the archives, a hushed reverence falls upon you. The walls are not lined with papyrus scrolls, but with thousands upon thousands of clay tablets, neatly arranged on wooden shelves, perhaps even in woven baskets. Each tablet, heavy and cool to the touch, holds a chapter of human thought, etched into its surface with cuneiform script. Imagine the labor involved. The shaping of the wet clay, the painstaking inscription by a skilled scribe, and then the careful drying and baking to preserve the words for eternity. You see scribes at work, their styluses scoring lines into fresh clay, their concentration absolute. What secrets do these tablets hold? You pick one up, its edges smooth from age. Here are epic poems, like the legendary tale of Gilgamesh, predating Homer by centuries, describing a hero's quest for immortality, grappling with profound questions of life and death. You see administrative records, royal decrees, treaties, and legal codes. But there is more. There are divinatory texts, prophecies, omens from the flight of birds or the configurations of stars. You find medical texts, detailing ancient remedies and surgical procedures, astronomical observations charting the movements of celestial bodies, and dictionaries, early attempts to categorize and understand languages. Ashurbanipal himself was a scholar king, an anomaly among his warrior predecessors. He understood the power of knowledge, sending his scribes across his vast empire to copy and translate texts from Sumerian, Akkadian, and Babylonian cultures. He actively sought out ancient wisdom, viewing it not just as a tool for governance, but as a legacy for the ages. This library was a deliberate act of cultural preservation, a testament to the idea that knowledge could and should be accumulated, organized, and passed down. When Nineveh fell in 612 before the Common Era, the library was buried under the rubble of the burning palace. Paradoxically, the fire that destroyed the building hardened many of these clay tablets, preserving them for thousands of years, awaiting their rediscovery in the 19th century. Our journey through the dawn of libraries continues westward, across the sands to a forgotten city in what is now modern Syria. Here, in the ruins of Ebla, archaeologists unearthed another extraordinary collection, predating Ashurbanipal by centuries. In the 23rd century before the Common Era, the Royal Library of Ebla was primarily an administrative archive, but its nearly 20,000 clay tablets reveal a sophisticated urban civilization. You see inventories of goods, economic treaties, and dictionaries of Sumerian and Eblaite, showcasing the early efforts to standardize language and commerce. This was not a public institution in the sense we understand it, but a vital engine for the city-state, a bureaucratic brain documenting every facet of its rich commercial and political life. Now, let us turn our gaze to the verdant banks of the Nile, to ancient Egypt, where the medium shifts and the very architecture of knowledge takes on new forms. You walk through the vast temple complexes, the air humid and fragrant with incense. Here, within the hallowed halls of the House of Life, you encounter not just a library but a vibrant school, a scriptorium, a medical center, and an archive all rolled into one. These were often attached to temples, places like the Ramesseum at Thebes, or the temples of Edfu and Dendera. Imagine yourself as a young scribe, diligently copying hieroglyphs onto sheets of papyrus. The papyrus, made from the pith of a reed, is a delicate yet durable material, carefully prepared, smoothed and rolled into scrolls. Unlike the heavy clay tablets, these scrolls are lighter, more portable and capable of holding vast amounts of text in a compact form. You see shelves filled not with tablets but with these precious rolls, some stacked horizontally, others placed in earthenware jars. The House of Life was more than just a storage facility. It was a dynamic intellectual hub where scribes learned their craft, where physicians studied ancient medical texts like the Ebers Papyrus, where priests preserved religious rituals and hymns, and where astronomers recorded the movements of the stars to regulate the calendar. You witness the creation of knowledge in real time, the careful copying of ancient wisdom, the editing of new texts, and the transmission of knowledge from generation to generation. Here, the emphasis was on continuity and tradition, on the sacred duty to pass on the accumulated wisdom of the gods and pharaohs. The destruction of these houses of life was often tied to the decline of specific dynasties or the collapse of temple economies, their invaluable scrolls sometimes left to decay or scattered by conflict and neglect. As you move through these ancient landscapes, you begin to appreciate the sheer human ingenuity, the relentless drive to capture transient thoughts and observations and give them permanence. From the durable clay of Mesopotamia to the pliable papyrus of Egypt, each medium represented a technological leap, an improvement in the quest for knowledge preservation. Now, fast forward many centuries as the world begins to shift towards the Hellenistic era. Even before the colossal dream of Alexandria, there were other significant attempts at systematic knowledge collection. Picture yourself in classical Athens. You might visit the school of Aristotle, the Lyceum. While not a public library in the grand sense, Aristotle amassed an astonishing personal collection of scrolls, a private library so extensive and so influential that it set a precedent. His students, the Peripatetics, continued his work, collecting, categorizing, and analyzing texts on every conceivable subject, from biology and metaphysics to ethics and poetics. This focus on critical inquiry and systematic organization laid crucial groundwork for the massive libraries that would follow. Now journey to the opulent city of Pergamum, nestled in what is modern-day Turkey. In the 2nd century before the Common Era, you find yourself in a city that would become a fierce rival to Alexandria itself, not just in military might or economic prowess, but in intellectual ambition. You stand before its magnificent library, perched on the Acropolis, overlooking the bustling city below. This was a place of immense pride for the Attalid kings who founded it. The very existence of Pergamum's library is a testament to the intense intellectual competition of the age. Legend has it that the Ptolemaic kings of Egypt, jealous of Pergamum's growing collection, placed an embargo on the export of papyrus, attempting to stifle their rival. But the scholars of Pergamum were not to be deterred. Instead, they innovated. You see here a different material for recording knowledge. Instead of papyrus, you observe scribes meticulously writing on prepared animal skins, parchment or vellum. This new medium, more durable and flexible than papyrus, could be written on both sides and folded into codices, an early precursor to the modern book. The Library of Pergamum, with its 200,000 volumes, became famous for this innovation, a direct result of intellectual rivalry and necessity. You can almost feel the smooth, treated animal hide as a scribe carefully unrolls a scroll, the ink contrasting sharply with the pale surface. Imagine the shelves here, teeming with scrolls of philosophy, medicine, history, and poetry. The Library of Pergamum was not merely a collection. It was a vibrant center for scholarship, attracting leading minds from across the Hellenistic world. Debates would have echoed through its halls, new theories would have been born, and ancient texts would have been painstakingly copied and preserved. Its destruction, unlike Nineveh's fiery end, was a slow, gradual decline, exacerbated by Roman conquest and eventually, a devastating transfer of its collection to Alexandria as a gift from Mark Antony to Cleopatra. This act, while preserving some texts in a different location, effectively dismantled one of the world's greatest intellectual centers. From the clay tablets of Mesopotamia to the papyrus scrolls of Egypt and the parchment of Pergamum, you have witnessed the nascent efforts to gather and preserve human knowledge. These were the foundational repositories, the brave first steps in an epic journey to accumulate and disseminate wisdom. Each library, whether a royal archive, a temple school, or a grand civic institution, represented a profound commitment to the human intellect. But as you reflect on these early triumphs of collection, a sense of vulnerability also emerges. Each one, in its own way, faced the impermanence of existence. Conquest, neglect, the ravages of time, and the devastating, unthinking destruction that would culminate in the tragic loss of even grander collections yet to be explored. You have seen the beginnings, the ambitious dreams of humanity to hold on to what it knows. Now, prepare to confront the scale of what was ultimately lost. As the ambition for knowledge grew, so too did the scale of humanity's attempts to capture it. The world now turns its gaze southwest, toward a city carved from the desert and brought to life by the will of a conqueror and the vision of his successors. You stand on the sun-baked streets of ancient Alexandria, a metropolis unlike any the world had ever seen. The air here buzzes with the polyglot murmur of merchants, scholars, and sailors from every corner of the known world. This is not a city that simply grew. It was designed, built with purpose, its straight, wide avenues cutting through the landscape, leading your eye towards marvels that would define an age. Imagine yourself walking along the Grand Royal Harbor, the scent of salt and distant lands filling your lungs. To your left, the Pharos Lighthouse, one of the seven wonders, pierces the sky, guiding ships laden with exotic goods and, crucially, with books. To your right, the Royal Palace complex stretches majestically, a testament to the Ptolemaic dynasty's immense power and, more importantly for our story, their unparalleled intellectual ambition. You are approaching the heart of this ambition, the very nexus of human thought. The first Ptolemy, Soter, understood that true power lay not just in conquest, but in the capture of minds. He envisioned a library that would be the repository of all the world's wisdom, a place where every scroll, every treatise, every poem, and every scientific observation could be found. His son, Ptolemy Philadelphus, brought this dream to spectacular fruition. You see the sheer determination in their project. This was not a modest collection. It was a totalizing enterprise, an attempt to gather, process, and contain the entire intellectual output of humanity. You step into the hallowed precincts of the Mausoleum, the Temple of the Muses, which houses the great library. This is more than just a building filled with books. It is an academy, a research institute, a bustling intellectual community where the greatest minds of antiquity lived, worked, and debated. Imagine the vibrant scene: philosophers deep in discussion, astronomers charting the heavens, physicians dissecting, poets reciting, and mathematicians solving equations that would stand for centuries. You feel the palpable energy of discovery, the quiet hum of intense study. The acquisition policy of the Library of Alexandria was legendary. Ptolemaic agents scoured the ancient world, seeking out every existing scroll. You hear the stories whispered among the scribes. Every ship that docked in Alexandria's port was searched. If books were found on board, they were confiscated, copied by the library's expert scribes, and then the copies were returned to the owners, while the originals were kept for the library's collection. This aggressive, systematic approach ensured an unprecedented accumulation of knowledge. Imagine the meticulous process of copying, editing, and cataloging countless rolls of papyrus. The air is thick with the faint, sweet smell of aged papyrus, cedar oil, and ink. You wander through vast halls lined with countless shelves, each holding hundreds, perhaps thousands of scrolls. The sheer volume is staggering. At its peak, the library is said to have contained anywhere from 400,000 to 700,000 scrolls, each scroll representing a distinct work or part of a larger one. This was not a library in the modern sense of bound books, but a sprawling archive of individual rolls. Each one was carefully labeled with a tag, telling you its author and title, stored in cubbyholes or pigeonholes. Here, you would find the collected works of Homer, meticulously edited and standardized by scholars like Aristarchus of Samothrace and Xenodotus. You would discover the medical treatises of Hippocrates, the histories of Herodotus and Thucydides, the philosophical dialogues of Plato and Aristotle. But it was not just Greek wisdom. The library was a crucible of cross-cultural scholarship. Scholars here translated Egyptian texts, Babylonian astronomical tablets, and Jewish scriptures into Greek, creating a truly universal library. The Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible, was reputedly commissioned here, a monumental undertaking that opened up an entire religious and cultural tradition to the Greek-speaking world. As you walk among the scholars, you observe the intense intellectual activity. Eratosthenes, the chief librarian, calculated the circumference of the earth with astonishing accuracy, using shadows and geometry. Euclid codified the principles of geometry that you still learn today. Aristarchus of Samos proposed a heliocentric model of the universe, millennia before Copernicus. Galen studied anatomy and medicine, laying foundations that would last for over 1,000 years. This was the powerhouse of ancient science and philosophy, a place where empirical observation and rational inquiry were celebrated and funded on an unprecedented scale. The Mausoleum was more than just storage. It was a fully funded research institution. Scholars, known as fellows, were supported by the Ptolemaic kings, given stipends, housing, and even communal dining facilities. You can imagine them gathering for lively debates, sharing their discoveries, pushing the boundaries of human understanding. The library was the nerve center of this intellectual hive, providing the raw material for their endeavors, the collective memory of human civilization at their fingertips. This concentrated power of knowledge made Alexandria an irresistible magnet for intellect. For centuries, it was the brightest star in the firmament of human learning, a testament to what could be achieved when wealth, political will, and intellectual curiosity converged. You witness a civilization not just preserving knowledge but actively creating it, synthesizing it, expanding it, laying the groundwork for much of what we consider modern thought. Yet even as you marvel at this unparalleled achievement, a shadow lengthens. The scale of its ambition also hints at its vulnerability. A collection so vast, so singular, becomes an immense target. Its very concentration of knowledge, its reliance on a single dynasty's patronage, its position within a city frequently caught in political turmoil, all conspire to make it fragile. You recall the previous libraries, their vulnerability to fire, conquest, and neglect. Alexandria, in its magnificent glory, was not immune. The story of the library's demise is not a simple one, nor is it a single, cataclysmic event. It is a slow, agonizing dissipation, a series of wounds inflicted over centuries. You hear echoes of Caesar's Alexandrian War in 48 BCE, when a fire set to his own fleet accidentally spread to the city, possibly consuming some of the library's stored scrolls in the dockyards. Then come the whispers of religious zeal, the edicts of Christian emperors against pagan learning, the destruction of the Serapeum, a daughter library, in 391 CE under Emperor Theodosius I, its statues of gods smashed, its scrolls dispersed or destroyed. And finally, the long shadow of the Arab conquest in 642 CE, with later accounts attributing its final, systematic destruction to the orders of Caliph Omar, though modern scholarship largely disputes this as a primary cause for the Great Library's burning, suggesting its decline was far more protracted. Regardless of the precise sequence of events, the outcome is undeniably tragic. Imagine the slow erosion of this intellectual treasure, scroll by scroll, hall by hall. You feel the weight of what was lost. Not just buildings, not just papyrus, but entire disciplines, unique perspectives, the hard-won insights of generations. Perhaps we lost plays by Aeschylus that could have shifted our understanding of Greek drama. Perhaps we lost scientific treatises that would have advanced technology by centuries. Perhaps we lost philosophical texts that could have offered new paths for human thought. The burning or dissipation of the Library of Alexandria stands as a stark warning, a testament to the fragility of knowledge and the ease with which it can be undone. It reminds you that the accumulation of wisdom is a monumental effort, but its preservation is an ongoing, precarious task. The starlight of Alexandria, once so brilliant, faded, leaving behind an enduring myth and a profound question. What if? What if all that knowledge had survived? You are left with the ghost of a library, a monumental achievement now existing only in legend, a beacon whose light, though extinguished, still shines in our collective memory as the ultimate symbol of humanity's intellectual aspiration and devastating loss. You stand in the hushed chamber of an ancient library, not the ghost of Alexandria, but a living, breathing space, perhaps in Pergamum or a scholar's private collection in Rome. The air is cool, dry, carrying the faint, earthy scent of aging papyrus and the subtle aroma of cedar oil used to preserve the precious rolls. Around you, shelves stretch high, not filled with the neatly ordered spines of modern books, but with countless cylindrical containers, each holding a tightly wound scroll. This is the physical reality of ancient knowledge, the very form that held the wisdom now lost or treasured. Before the printed page, before even the bound book as you know it, there was the scroll. To read was an act of unfolding, a journey along a continuous surface, a physical engagement with the text. Imagine reaching for one now. Your fingers trace the smooth, cured hide of a parchment roll, or perhaps the slightly rougher, fibrous texture of papyrus. Each scroll is a testament to immense labor. Papyrus, the paper of the ancient world, originated in the marshlands of the Nile. You see the tall, reedy plant, its triangular stalks cut, stripped, and sliced into thin strips. These strips are then carefully laid side by side, overlapping slightly, another layer placed perpendicularly on top. Pressure is applied, sometimes with mallets, sometimes simply by stacking the sheets and allowing the plant's natural sap to bind them together. Once dried and polished, you have a flexible, durable sheet, ready to receive the scribe's ink. The process is meticulous, requiring skill and patience. Think of the hundreds, even thousands, of such sheets needed for a single significant work. These individual sheets, or chartae, would then be glued together edge to form a long strip, often 20 or 30 feet in length, sometimes much longer. Pliny the Elder speaks of rolls extending over 100 feet. Imagine the sheer physicality of such an object. You take a roll from its niche. It might be wrapped in a protective cloth, perhaps dyed a vibrant purple, or housed in a cylindrical wooden or leather case, known as a capsa or scrinium. A small tag, a titulus or index, hangs from it, telling you the author and title. Perhaps it is a treatise by Aristotle, or a forgotten play by Euripides. You carefully unfasten the ties, feeling the weight of the wisdom within. To read, you would hold the scroll with both hands. Your left hand would unroll the text, revealing columns of script, while your right hand would roll up the portion you have already read. It is a continuous motion, a dance of hands and eyes. There is no quick flicking of pages, no jumping ahead. You move deliberately, reverently, following the flow of the scribe's hand. The text itself is often written in an unbroken script, scriptio continua, without spaces between words, sometimes even without punctuation. This means reading is not just seeing but actively deciphering. Your mind is constantly engaged in segmenting the words, understanding their meaning and context. It is an immersive experience demanding total concentration. You are not passively consuming information, you are actively collaborating with the text, breathing life into the silent script. Consider the effort involved in producing these scrolls. Not only the cultivation and preparation of the material, but the act of transcription itself. Scribes, often working in scriptoria or dedicated writing rooms, would copy texts by hand, sometimes from dictation, sometimes from another scroll. This was a slow, arduous process prone to errors. Each letter was formed with care, ink made from soot and gum Arabic, applied with a reed pen. The margins might be wide, offering space for annotations, commentaries, or corrections. These marginalia themselves form a fascinating layer of interaction, a dialogue across centuries between readers and scholars. The libraries you imagine, the great halls of Alexandria or Pergamum, were not just repositories. They were workshops of knowledge, bustling with scribes, scholars, and readers. The constant process of copying and recopying was vital, not just for dissemination but for preservation. Each new copy was a chance for a text to survive, to be passed on. Yet, each copy also carried the risk of further corruption or even outright loss if the original was destroyed. Think of the value placed on these objects. They were not mere commodities. They were treasures, often passed down through generations, bequeathed in wills, or gifted to temples and cities. A single well-made scroll could represent weeks, even months, of skilled labor. The content within was priceless, representing the accumulated thought of generations. The transition from papyrus to parchment marks another significant development in the story of ancient books. While papyrus was dominant for centuries, its fragility and susceptibility to moisture and insects were persistent challenges. Legend has it that the rise of parchment, made from animal skins, was spurred by a rivalry between the Library of Alexandria and the Library of Pergamum. The Ptolemies of Egypt, eager to maintain Alexandria's supremacy, embargoed papyrus exports to Pergamum. This forced Pergamum to innovate, refining the process of preparing animal skins, typically sheep, goat, or calf, into a smooth, durable writing surface. Parchment offered distinct advantages. It was far more robust than papyrus, able to withstand more handling and last longer. It could also be written on both sides, a significant improvement in efficiency and material usage. This led to the gradual development of the codex, the precursor to your modern book, where sheets of parchment were folded and sewn together into quires. But for much of antiquity, the scroll reigned supreme. It shaped the way people interacted with knowledge, the very architecture of their intellectual lives. You can almost feel the smooth pull of the scroll as it unrolls, the delicate rustle of the material. You imagine the reader's eyes moving across the continuous line of text, following the narrative thread. There is no table of contents, no index in the modern sense. To find a specific passage, you had to manually unroll and re-roll, relying on memory or small marginal cues. It was a more intimate, less fragmented way of engaging with a text. The sheer volume of these scrolls in a great library like Alexandria is staggering to contemplate. Hundreds of thousands of individual rolls, each one a miniature universe of words, ideas, and stories. The logistical challenge of acquiring, storing, cataloging, and preserving such a collection was immense. Librarians were not just custodians. They were scholars in their own right, responsible for editing, collating different versions, and ensuring the integrity of the texts. Consider the journey of a single work. From its initial composition, perhaps dictated by a philosopher or poet, to its first transcription onto papyrus. Then, the copies made for dissemination, carried by merchants or scholars across the Mediterranean. Each copy a fragile link in a long chain, susceptible to loss by shipwreck, fire, neglect, or deliberate destruction. The burning of a library was not just the burning of a building, it was the incineration of thousands of these individual worlds, each one irreplaceable. You consider the implications of this format for the transmission of knowledge. A scroll is inherently linear. It encourages a sequential reading, an absorption of the text in the order the author intended. There is a kind of meditative quality to it, a sustained engagement that might be harder to achieve with the quick-skimming possibilities of a modern book or digital interface. You are forced to slow down, to engage deeply with each word, each phrase. And then, when you are finished, the careful act of re-rolling. Making sure the scroll is tightly wound, preventing damage, returning it to its protective casing. It is a ritual, a respectful closing of a portal to another mind, another time. Each roll, carefully placed back in its cubbyhole, awaits the next reader, the next journey into its infinite text. The libraries that held these scrolls were not just buildings, they were vast, interconnected networks of human thought. The papyrus and parchment, humble materials transformed by human ingenuity and labor, became the vessels for the greatest achievements of ancient civilizations. When these vessels were broken, when the scrolls were consumed by flame, it was not just paper or animal skin that burned. It was the very fabric of human intellectual heritage, a testament to the fact that even the most carefully preserved knowledge can be lost, leaving behind only echoes and the lingering question of what worlds, what insights, were lost forever within those infinite scrolls. You reflect on the incredible vulnerability of this method of storing and transmitting knowledge, a vulnerability that continues to haunt us even in our digital age. The burning of a library was a physical catastrophe, an inferno that consumed not just ink and parchment, but the very essence of human endeavor. Yet, before that fire, before the smoke choked the air and the flames devoured the wisdom of ages, there were the guardians. There were the men and women whose lives were dedicated to the meticulous, often laborious task of creating, preserving, and understanding these infinite scrolls. You step into a different wing of the great library, one filled not with readers, but with the quiet industry of creation. The air here is thick with the scent of fresh papyrus and animal hide, the metallic tang of ink, and perhaps the faint, sweet smell of beeswax used to polish the wooden cases. Imagine the soft scratching sound of a reed pen on papyrus, a rhythmic whisper that echoes through the vast hall. You see rows of scribes, each hunched over a low desk, their backs curved from years of precise work. The light from a nearby window or perhaps an oil lamp casts a warm glow on their concentrated faces. This is the scriptorium, the heart where knowledge was not just stored, but born anew with every carefully copied character. Each scribe is a living bridge, painstakingly transcribing texts that might be hundreds of years old, ensuring their survival for generations yet to come. You watch a young apprentice, his brow furrowed in concentration, practicing his letters on a wax tablet, his movements slow and deliberate. Nearby, an experienced master scribe works with an almost meditative grace, his hand flowing across the scroll, forming Greek or Latin script with elegant precision. Consider the tools of their trade. You see a small, sharp knife used to trim the papyrus or parchment, a ruler to guide their lines, and a pumice stone to smooth the writing surface. Their inkwells are simple pots of clay, holding black ink made from soot and gum arabic, or red ink derived from mineral pigments. The pens themselves are typically cut from reeds, their tips split and shaped to hold and release the ink evenly. These are not tools of grand artistry, but instruments of meticulous function, designed for endless repetition and absolute accuracy. The work is slow. Terribly slow by our modern standards. A single book, what we might consider a small volume today, could take a scribe months, even years, to complete. You contemplate the sheer patience required. Every letter must be formed correctly. Every word must be spelled right. A mistake is not easily corrected. It often means scraping away the ink with a knife or a sponge, or worse, starting an entire sheet or column over again. Imagine the fatigue in your hand, the ache in your back, the strain on your eyes as you labor hour after hour, day after day, week after week. But the scribes were more than mere copyists. Many were scholars in their own right, capable of recognizing errors in the text they were reproducing, correcting discrepancies, or even adding their own marginal notes and commentaries. You realize that a good scribe was not just a pair of hands, but an active mind, engaged in a dialogue with the text, wrestling with its meaning and accuracy. They were the first line of defense against textual corruption, the unsung heroes who ensured that the words of Plato, Aristotle, Homer, or Euclid remained as close as possible to their original forms. Beyond the scribes, you encounter the true intellectual architects of these vast repositories, the scholars and librarians. These were the polymaths of their age, men and women who dedicated their lives not just to copying, but to understanding, organizing, and expanding the sum of human knowledge. Imagine yourself walking through halls lined with shelves, not of books as we know them, but of thousands upon thousands of scrolls. Who organized this immense collection? Who created the first catalogs, categorizing works by author, subject, or genre? These scholars were the pioneers of bibliography and classification. You might observe a librarian, perhaps the head of the library, poring over a new acquisition, dictating its details to an assistant for inclusion in the master catalog. This was not a simple task. Without standardized titles or author pages, often only the opening lines of a scroll would identify its content. The librarian had to possess an encyclopedic knowledge to correctly place each new work within the existing framework. They were the search engines of their day, the human interface to a world of information. Think of the great intellectual figures who served as librarians at institutions like the Library of Alexandria. Figures such as Xenodotus, Eratosthenes, or Aristarchus of Samothrace. These were not just administrators. They were towering intellectuals, poets, geographers, astronomers, and grammarians. Eratosthenes, for example, famously calculated the circumference of the Earth with remarkable accuracy while serving as chief librarian. You understand that the library was not just a storehouse, but a vibrant research institution, a hub of intellectual inquiry and discovery. You might overhear a spirited debate between two scholars in a quiet corner of the library, perhaps discussing a point of philosophy or a complex astronomical theory. Their voices are hushed, respectful, but their arguments are sharp, fueled by years of study and access to an unparalleled collection of texts. Imagine the sheer volume of knowledge contained within their minds, the result of countless hours spent poring over scrolls, cross-referencing ideas, and piecing together fragments of understanding. The scholars were also the editors of ancient texts. Many classical works that survive today do so because a dedicated scholar in Alexandria or Pergamon painstakingly collated multiple existing copies, identified the most reliable readings, and produced a critical edition. You realize that without their rigorous scholarship, much of our understanding of ancient literature and thought would be far more fragmented and unreliable. They were the custodians of textual integrity, working to ensure the purity and accuracy of the written word. They were also the educators, training the next generation of scribes, scholars, and thinkers. Young students would gather around a master, listening intently as he expounded on a complex philosophical treatise or demonstrated a point of grammar. The library was a university in itself, a place where knowledge was not just preserved, but actively transmitted and expanded. When these libraries burned, it was not just the physical scrolls that perished. It was the accumulated wisdom of these human guardians. It was the unique insights of a scholar like Aristarchus, whose commentaries on Homer were said to fill over 800 scrolls. It was the painstaking corrections of countless scribes, whose precise hands had preserved texts for centuries. It was the debates, the discoveries, the intellectual lineage that connected generations of thinkers. The flames consumed the individual voices of these scholars and scribes, silencing their arguments, erasing their painstaking labor, and forever obscuring their unique contributions to the human story. You feel a profound sense of loss not just for the texts themselves, but for the minds that breathed life into them, that curated them, that understood their deepest meanings. Their work, however, was not entirely in vain. The very concept of a library as a center of learning, the idea of systematic classification, the practice of textual criticism, the dedication to preserving knowledge for future generations. These enduring legacies are testaments to their vision and tireless efforts. Even in the ashes of the greatest ancient libraries, the faint echoes of their work persisted, influencing the monastic scriptoria of the Middle Ages and the great university libraries of today. You recognize that the vulnerability of knowledge is not just about the fragility of papyrus or the destructive power of fire. It is also about the vulnerability of the human endeavor itself. These guardians of the mind, with their meticulous pens and their sharp intellects, understood the preciousness of every single word. They built the intellectual foundations of civilizations, one scroll, one corrected passage, one catalog entry at a time. And when those foundations crumbled, a part of humanity's collective memory was extinguished, leaving us to wonder about the worlds of thought that now exist only in the realm of silence, lost to the inexorable march of time and the tragic absence of those infinite scrolls. You turn your mind now to the true cost of these conflagrations, to the voids left not just in architectural grandeur, but in the very tapestry of human thought. It is not merely the number of scrolls, the sheer volume of papyrus or parchment, that haunts us. It is the voices they contained, the narratives they spun, the questions they asked, and the answers they offered that are now silenced forever. You stand at the precipice of this vast, echoing silence, and you strain to hear the words that never reached us, the perspectives erased, the lives unremembered. Imagine walking through the phantom aisles of the great Library of Alexandria, or the House of Wisdom in Baghdad. You envision not just shelves but minds. Thousands upon thousands of minds, committed to the written word. For every text we know existed, for every author whose name survives, there were hundreds, perhaps thousands, whose contributions were equally significant but are now utterly unknown. You feel the weight of this oblivion, an intellectual darkness stretching across millennia. Consider the realm of philosophy. We often speak of the giants like Plato and Aristotle, whose works, though incomplete, form the bedrock of Western thought. But what about their fierce critics? What about the alternative schools of thought that flourished alongside them, equally compelling, equally nuanced, but now reduced to mere footnotes in the surviving texts of their rivals? You can almost hear the passionate debates, the sophisticated counter-arguments, the entire intellectual lineages that were snuffed out. Think of the Epicureans, the Stoics, the Cynics. We have fragments, interpretations, summaries, but what of the comprehensive treatises, the detailed arguments, the full spectrum of their ethical, metaphysical, and scientific inquiries? They are gone, and with them, an entire landscape of human understanding, forcing us to reconstruct history's intellectual journey with only a fraction of its true map. Then there are the scientific advancements. The ancient world was a crucible of ingenuity, a period of breathtaking leaps in mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and engineering. You know of Archimedes, of Euclid, of Hippocrates. But what about the countless unsung innovators? What were the truly revolutionary discoveries made centuries before their time, only to be rediscovered much later or perhaps never at all? Imagine the sophisticated medical texts detailing surgeries or herbal remedies lost to the flames, forcing generations to start anew. Picture the astronomical observations, meticulously recorded over centuries, that could have provided a richer understanding of cosmic mechanics, vanished. You realize that each lost text was not just a piece of paper, but a snapshot of human genius, a solution to a problem, an insight into the natural world that could have accelerated progress by centuries. We are left to wonder what technologies, what cures, what fundamental laws of physics might have been understood and applied by ancient civilizations, only to be reset to zero. The true tragedy of these lost libraries, however, lies in the silencing of diverse voices. History, as it is often said, is written by the victors. But in these lost repositories, there existed histories written by the vanquished, by the marginalized, by women, by enslaved peoples, by indigenous cultures. You could have read the chronicles of Nubian kings, not just from the perspective of their Egyptian neighbors, but from their own scribes. You might have encountered the poetry of Roman women, their joys and sorrows, their insights into a patriarchal society, not filtered through the lenses of male authors. Imagine the autobiographies of freed slaves, detailing their struggles and triumphs in their own words, offering a raw, unfiltered perspective on the brutal realities of their world. These are the untold stories, the alternative narratives that would paint a far richer, far more complex picture of ancient life. Without them, our understanding of the human experience across these millennia is profoundly skewed, incomplete, and tragically narrow. Consider the literary arts. For every Homer, every Sophocles, every Virgil whose works survive, how many other poets, playwrights, and storytellers were equally brilliant, equally captivating? You could have journeyed through epic poems of forgotten heroes, laughed at comedies that satirized the quirks of long-dead societies, or wept at tragedies that explored universal human dilemmas through entirely different mythologies. The richness of ancient drama, for example, is hinted at by the mere handful of plays that survived. What of the hundreds of others, performed to rapt audiences, shaping the moral and emotional landscape of their time? These lost narratives represent not just lost entertainment, but lost forms of emotional expression, lost explorations of human nature, and lost insights into the collective psyche of entire civilizations. Even the mundane, the everyday held profound value. What about the letters between ordinary citizens, detailing their daily lives, their loves, their fears, their grievances? What about the agricultural treatises outlining advanced farming techniques, the engineering manuals describing innovative construction methods, the cookbooks preserving ancient recipes, or the legal documents that shed light on the intricacies of ancient justice systems? These seemingly less grand texts provided the texture of daily life, the practical knowledge that sustained empires, and the intimate details that connect us across time. Their absence leaves gaping holes in our ability to fully comprehend the societies we study, forcing us to infer much of what was once explicitly documented. You are left with outlines where there should be vibrant, living tapestries. The burning of these libraries represents more than just the destruction of physical objects. It signifies the profound silencing of human potential. Each lost scroll was a voice, a thought, a fragment of human endeavor that might have inspired, instructed, or entertained future generations. It is the quiet hum of countless minds, working diligently, passionately, contributing to a collective consciousness, that was abruptly extinguished. This was a profound threat because it was often perpetrated by those within the society, by those who believed they were doing good, purging impurities, or cleansing the intellectual landscape. Consider the burning of books deemed pagan by early Christian authorities, or the destruction of scientific works that challenged established religious doctrines in various eras. You hear the pronouncements, the justifications for this intellectual cleansing. The reasoning was often that these books contained dangerous ideas, that they corrupted the mind, or that they led people astray from the one true path. The goal was not just to destroy the physical objects, but to control thought itself, to shape the collective consciousness by removing any competing narratives. This ideological censorship, enforced with fire, cast a long shadow over intellectual development, stifling debate and forcing divergent thinkers into hiding. Political upheaval also played a significant role. Empires rise and fall, dynasties succeed one another, and each new regime often seeks to legitimize its rule by discrediting or erasing the legacy of its predecessors. You observe the change in power, the new banners flying. Records of previous administrations, accounts of inconvenient truths, or the writings of deposed philosophers might suddenly become dangerous artifacts. The destruction of these documents was an act of rewriting history, an attempt to control the narrative for future generations. The victor's version of events became the only one accessible, shaping perceptions for centuries to come. Finally, and perhaps most subtly insidious, was the slow, quiet erosion of neglect. Imagine a once grand library, its patrons dwindling, its resources stretched thin. You walk through dimly lit corridors, smelling the dust and mildew. The cost of maintaining a vast collection was immense. Scribes to copy and recopy texts as they aged, conservators to repair damage, librarians to organize and catalog, and secure buildings to house them. When empires declined, when economic prosperity waned, or when intellectual curiosity itself diminished, these vital resources often disappeared. You see the scrolls deteriorating, unread, uncopied, left to crumble on their shelves. The knowledge contained within them, though not actively burned, slowly fades into oblivion through sheer apathy. A precious unique manuscript, perhaps the only existing copy of a rare philosophical work, might simply be forgotten, lost in an obscure corner, eventually devoured by insects or moisture. This slow death by neglect is arguably as tragic as any sudden conflagration, for it represents a failure of will, a surrender to the entropy that constantly threatens all human endeavors. It is a slow suffocation rather than a violent strangulation. You feel the chill of indifference, perhaps the most difficult foe to combat, for it lacks the drama of a raging fire or the fury of an invading army, yet is equally effective in its silent destruction. The serpent's coil then was not a single predator but a multi-headed beast. It comprised the careless spark, the shaking earth, the rising floodwaters, the invading army's torch, the fanatic's decree, the politician's purge, and the quiet, pervasive rot of neglect. Each one, in its own way, devoured fragments of human wisdom, leaving us to forever navigate a landscape scarred by absence. You now understand that the creation and preservation of knowledge were not passive acts, but a constant, vigilant struggle against a myriad of relentless forces, both within and without the human spirit. The flame of knowledge, so bright and beautiful, was always fragile, constantly threatened by the darkness that sought to consume it. You have come to understand that knowledge is fragile, a delicate flame against a vast darkness. But now you stand at the precipice of a different kind of darkness, a sudden, searing conflagration where the very air crackles with the fury of human ambition and the destructive force of conquest. Imagine the quiet hum of a great library, the rustle of papyrus, the murmur of scholars, suddenly shattered by the distant, then immediate roar of an invading army. This is not the slow creep of neglect, nor the random act of nature. This is deliberate, systematic, and often absolute annihilation. You're there. The ground trembles not from an earthquake, but from the marching feet of thousands. The scent in the air is no longer parchment and ink, but the acrid sting of smoke, carried on a wind that whips through the streets of a city under siege. You see the glint of metal, hear the shouts in a language you do not understand, or perhaps understand all too well as the language of conquest. The libraries, those bastions of accumulated human wisdom, often stand as potent symbols. To burn them is not merely to destroy books. It is to erase memory, to silence dissent, to conquer the very intellect of a people. It is an act designed to sever a civilization from its past, leaving it rootless and vulnerable. Think of Alexandria, that colossal beacon of the ancient world. You walk through its imagined streets, past the magnificent lighthouse, the pharos, a wonder of engineering that pierced the heavens. You approach the great library, a sprawling complex that housed perhaps hundreds of thousands, even millions of scrolls. Imagine the sheer volume of human endeavor contained within those walls. The plays of Aeschylus, the histories of Herodotus, the mathematics of Euclid, the astronomical observations of Hipparchus. Scholars from across the known world flocked here, their minds alight with curiosity, their debates echoing through the grand halls. You can almost hear their voices, feel the weight of their collective genius. But empires rise and fall, and with them cities burn. You witness the first brush with destruction, not as a direct attack on the library itself, but as collateral damage of war. When Julius Caesar found himself besieged in Alexandria in 48 before the Common Era, his forces set fire to their own ships in the harbor to prevent them from falling into enemy hands. The flames, fanned by the Mediterranean wind, spread inland, consuming docks, warehouses, and, according to some accounts, vast quantities of scrolls stored near the port, awaiting integration into the main collection or shipment elsewhere. You feel the heat, see the smoke billow, a dark plume against the vibrant Egyptian sky. It is a terrible irony. Even the desperate acts of self-preservation in war can inadvertently torch the very records of civilization. Yet Alexandria faced other, more insidious assaults. You perceive the shifting sands of power, the rise of new doctrines. In later centuries, as the Roman Empire embraced Christianity, you see zealots, fueled by fervent belief and hostility toward pagan learning, turn their destructive gaze upon the remaining intellectual treasures. The Serapeum, a temple complex that housed a daughter library, fell to a Christian mob in 391 Common Era, its contents scattered or destroyed. You hear the shouts of the crowd, feel the stones beneath your feet as they storm the sacred precinct, their anger a palpable force against the quiet dignity of knowledge. It is a different kind of war, a war of ideas fought with torches and stones instead of swords, but no less devastating. And then, centuries later, the popular narrative whispers of a final, complete destruction at the hands of the Arab conquerors in the 7th century Common Era. You hear the apocryphal tale, though now largely discredited by historians, that Caliph Omar, when asked what to do with the library's books, declared, "If these books are in agreement with the Quran, we have no need of them. If they are opposed, destroy them." While this dramatic narrative likely serves to demonize, it powerfully illustrates the fear that conquering powers might actively seek to eradicate existing knowledge, either because it conflicts with their own ideology or because they deem it superfluous. You imagine the immense pyres, the ashes of countless scrolls fertilizing the desert sands for 6 months, heating public baths. The image, even if mythical, speaks to a profound truth: the potential for absolute, deliberate eradication of a culture's recorded thought in the crucible of conquest. But Alexandria is not alone in its tragic fate. You turn your gaze eastward to the opulent city of Persepolis, the ceremonial capital of the Achaemenid Persian Empire. Here, in 330 before the Common Era, you stand with the victorious army of Alexander the Great. You have marched across continents, endured unimaginable hardships, all for conquest. And now you see the magnificent palaces, the grand halls, the libraries filled with the administrative and historical records of a vast empire. After a night of feasting and revelry, perhaps fueled by a desire for vengeance against the Persian destruction of Athens, or perhaps simply by the excesses of war, Alexander allows or even orders the burning of the city. You see the flames engulf the structures, the precious cuneiform tablets, the scrolls detailing the lives and laws of a mighty civilization, turning to dust and smoke. The deliberate act of an individual, driven by power and perhaps a twisted sense of justice, can wipe away centuries of accumulated wisdom in a single night of destructive abandon. Shift your focus now to the flourishing Islamic world, specifically to Baghdad in the 13th century Common Era. This city, during the Abbasid Caliphate, was known as the House of Wisdom, a global center for learning, mathematics, medicine, and philosophy. You walk through its vibrant markets, hear the multiple languages spoken, see the scholars debating in the courtyards. The libraries here were not just repositories, they were active workshops of translation and innovation, preserving and expanding upon the knowledge of Greece, Rome, Persia, and India. You are surrounded by an intellectual energy that feels almost tangible. Then the Mongol hordes arrive in 1258. You hear the terrifying thrum of their drums, feel the ground shake beneath the hooves of their cavalry. They storm the city, slaughtering hundreds of thousands, pillaging everything in sight. The libraries, including the celebrated House of Wisdom, are not spared. You witness the scenes of unthinkable devastation. Books tossed into the Tigris River until its waters run black with ink from the dissolved manuscripts, or used to pave roads for cavalry or burned for fuel. You smell the stench of burning parchment, feel the grit of ash in your throat. Imagine the loss. Priceless treatises on astronomy, medicine, philosophy, literature, translated from every corner of the world, all feeding the river or the flames. The sheer volume of destruction is staggering, an act that plunged a vibrant intellectual tradition into a long period of recovery. Move further east to ancient India, and the grand Buddhist monastery and University of Nalanda, in the 12th century Common Era. This was not just a library but a vast residential university, housing thousands of monks and scholars, teaching all branches of knowledge from medicine to logic, metaphysics to astronomy. You hear the chanting, see the serene faces of students, feel the peaceful yet intellectually charged atmosphere. Its libraries, known as Ratnasagara, the Sea of Jewels, Ratnadati, the Ocean of Jewels, and Ratnaranjika, the Jewel-Adorned, were legendary, holding millions of manuscripts. Then you see the Turkic Muslim invaders, led by Bakhtiyar Khilji, sweep through the region. In 1193 Common Era, they attacked Nalanda. You witness the massacre of monks, the systematic burning of the magnificent multi-story libraries. The accounts speak of the conflagration raging for months, the smoke rising to obscure the sun, the invaluable texts turning to ash. You feel the profound sorrow, the weight of a spiritual and intellectual heritage extinguished in a brutal act of conquest and iconoclasm. The destruction here was total, designed to eliminate not just books, but an entire intellectual and religious tradition rooted in specific texts. These are the most famous examples, the towering infernos of intellectual loss. But you must understand that these are but a few vivid brushstrokes on a canvas painted black with countless other acts of destruction. Think of the smaller, provincial libraries in cities sacked by Romans, Goths, Vandals, Huns, or any of the myriad empires throughout history. You see the burning of Carthage, the deliberate salting of its earth, ensuring nothing would grow again, including its cultural legacy. You imagine the countless cities throughout China, the Middle East, Europe, Africa, and the Americas, where conquest meant the deliberate or accidental annihilation of written records. The destructive hand of war and conquest is multifaceted. It is the direct burning, the intentional act of cleansing. It is the looting where precious manuscripts are scattered, stolen, or lost forever in the chaos. It is the indifference of soldiers using scrolls as kindling for fires, or for bedding, or simply as trash. You picture a priceless philosophical treatise used to prop up a wobbly table, or a rare medical text torn into strips to bind a wound. It is the aftermath, when the conquerors, often illiterate in the conquered tongue, might simply discard or allow to rot what they deem worthless. The records of indigenous peoples, for example, often fell prey to European conquerors who saw them as pagan idols or irrelevant writings, leading to their systematic destruction. You stand amidst the ruins now, the fires long since extinguished, leaving behind only the ghost of smoke and the chill of absence. The silence is deafening, broken only by the crunch of ash beneath your feet. Where once vibrant stories, complex equations, profound philosophies, and crucial histories resided, there is now only rubble and emptiness. You pick up a charred fragment of what was once a scroll, the ink long since turned to dust, the wisdom it once held forever gone. This, then, is the stark reality of empires and flames. It is the ultimate censorship, enacted not by a single decree, but by the roar of cannons, the clash of swords, and the consuming hunger of fire. The libraries, those fragile vessels of human experience, become unwitting casualties, their destruction a tragic, indelible mark on the timeline of civilization. You understand now that the preservation of knowledge is not merely an academic pursuit. It is a desperate struggle against the very forces that seek to dominate, to erase, to control the narrative of history by destroying its very records. When a library burns in the crucible of conquest, It is not just paper and ink that turn to ash. It is the dreams, the discoveries, the very identity of a people, all consumed by the destructive hand of war. The silence that follows is the sound of countless voices forever lost. You have heard the silence that follows, the chilling echo of voices forever lost to the ravages of war. But what if that silence was not merely the absence of a few songs or stories, but the eradication of entire sciences, philosophies, and histories? What if the collective wisdom of centuries, painstakingly gathered and preserved, vanished in a single catastrophic blaze? This is the story of the great erasures, the moments when humanity's brightest intellectual beacons were extinguished, plunging vast swathes of human understanding into an unknowable darkness. Picture yourself now, not amidst the recent smoke of battle, but journeying back in time, to an era when knowledge was a physical edifice, a towering monument of papyrus and parchment. You are standing on the sun-baked streets of ancient Alexandria, a city pulsing with intellectual fervor, its harbor a gateway to the world, its very air thick with the murmur of scholars debating, discoveries being made. Before you rises the legendary Library of Alexandria, not a mere building but a complex of learning, encompassing lecture halls, observatories, even botanical gardens. Its sheer scale is staggering. Imagine holding in your mind the concept of hundreds of thousands of scrolls, perhaps even 700,000, each one a testament to human curiosity and endeavor. You walk through its grand entrance, the scent of aged papyrus and cedar oil filling your senses. Scribes meticulously copy texts in vast scriptoria. Scholars from every corner of the known world pore over manuscripts, translating, annotating, extending the boundaries of human comprehension. Here, Eratosthenes calculated the circumference of the earth with remarkable accuracy. Euclid laid down the foundations of geometry. Archimedes explored the principles of mechanics. Physicians sought cures, astronomers charted the stars, historians meticulously recorded the past. The Library of Alexandria was the beating heart of Hellenistic civilization, a universal repository of human thought, a place where all extant knowledge was meant to be collected, preserved, and expanded upon. It was humanity's first true attempt at a global brain, a living archive of everything known. But then you hear the distant rumble. The world around you shifts. The vibrancy gives way to unease. The history of the library's destruction is not a single clear-cut narrative, but a tapestry woven with threads of conflict, neglect, and changing times. Was it Julius Caesar whose siege in 48 before Common Era inadvertently set fire to ships in the harbor, a fire that spread to the library's warehouses? Or was it the Christian Roman Emperor Theodosius I, who in the late 4th century Common Era, ordered the destruction of pagan temples, including the Serapeum, an annex of the Great Library, its collection dispersed or destroyed by zealous crowds? Or perhaps the final devastating blow came with the Arab conquest of Egypt in the 7th century, though many modern historians debate this account. Regardless of the precise date or specific perpetrator, the outcome was the same, a cataclysmic loss. Imagine the roar of the flames, the acrid smoke stinging your eyes, as centuries of accumulated wisdom curl and blacken into ash. Picture the panic as scribes attempt to rescue what they can, only to be overwhelmed by the inferno. Think of the unique copies, the sole records of entire schools of thought, dissolving into dust. You are witnessing the burning of not just books, but of entire intellectual lineages, of scientific discoveries that would have to be painstakingly rediscovered centuries later, of philosophical insights that vanished before they could truly take root. Consider the plays of Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides. We know only a fraction of their complete works. What masterpieces of tragedy and comedy were lost forever within those Alexandrian walls? What medical treatises, detailing advanced surgical techniques or pharmaceutical remedies, turned to smoke? What astronomical observations, charting celestial movements with precision, were obliterated, setting back our understanding of the cosmos by 1,000 years? The burning of Alexandria was not just a historical event. It was a wound in the collective memory of humankind, a chasm in our intellectual timeline, leaving us forever to speculate about the paths not taken, the knowledge never inherited. Fast forward many centuries, and you find yourself in another magnificent metropolis, a beacon of learning in a different corner of the world. You are in 9th century Baghdad, the capital of the Abbasid Caliphate, a city that glowed with intellectual brilliance during Europe's so-called Dark Ages. Here, under the patronage of enlightened caliphs, flourished the House of Wisdom or Beit al-Hikmah, an institution that rivaled and in many ways surpassed Alexandria in its ambition. Walk with me through its bustling courtyards. You hear the rhythmic scraping of pens on parchment, the low murmur of scholars speaking in Arabic, Greek, Persian, and Syriac. This was not just a library but a research institute, a translation center, an academy where scholars from diverse backgrounds collaborated to synthesize, translate, and expand upon the accumulated knowledge of the world. Imagine mathematicians like Al-Khwarizmi, whose work gave us algebra and algorithms, working here. Physicians like Al-Razi, whose medical encyclopedia was used for centuries, studied here. Astronomers refined instruments and made groundbreaking observations. Philosophers grappled with the profound questions of existence, drawing on Greek and Indian thought, forging new paths. The House of Wisdom possessed an unparalleled collection of texts. Scholars journeyed far and wide to acquire manuscripts, bringing back Greek philosophical and scientific texts, Persian literary works, and Indian mathematical and medical treatises. These were not merely stored, they were actively engaged with, translated, critiqued, and built upon, sparking an unprecedented explosion of scientific and cultural innovation. You can feel the energy, the vibrant exchange of ideas, the boundless optimism in the power of reason and inquiry. But like Alexandria, this light was destined to be violently extinguished. In the year 1258 Common Era, the Mongol hordes, led by Hulagu Khan, swept through Persia and laid siege to Baghdad. The city, once the jewel of the world, endured a brutal siege. For weeks, the Mongols sacked and pillaged, massacring hundreds of thousands of its inhabitants. And amidst this carnage, the House of Wisdom, its priceless collection of manuscripts, its living repository of global learning, met its tragic end. You stand by the banks of the Tigris River, but instead of clear water, you see a horrifying sight. The river runs black. Black with the ink from countless books, thrown into its currents by the invaders. The Mongols, not understanding the value of these scholarly works, either burned them or tossed them into the river to form makeshift bridges for their horses, or perhaps simply to clear the buildings. Imagine the pages, hundreds upon thousands of them, dissolving into a dark, swirling pulp, the intellectual heritage of centuries vanishing before your eyes. This was not a loss of mere volumes. It was the abrupt termination of a golden age. Imagine the medical discoveries on the cusp of being made, the mathematical theorems about to be proven, the philosophical arguments nearing their culmination. How many cures for diseases were lost with those scrolls? How many technological advancements were set back by generations? The destruction of the House of Wisdom created a void that reverberated across the medieval world, a stark reminder that even the most robust intellectual infrastructure is vulnerable to the whims of conquest and ignorance. These two monumental losses, Alexandria and Baghdad, stand as stark monuments to the fragility of knowledge. But they are not alone. Throughout history, countless smaller, yet equally devastating erasures have occurred. Think of the Mayan codices, intricate accordion-fold books filled with hieroglyphs detailing their astronomy, history, religion, and rituals. During the Spanish conquest, zealous missionaries, viewing them as pagan idolatry, systematically burned almost all of them. Only a handful survived, leaving us with a tantalizing, frustratingly incomplete glimpse into a complex and sophisticated civilization. Consider the Roman libraries, vast collections scattered across the empire, many perishing in fires, earthquakes, or the gradual decay of time and neglect? What unique perspectives on Roman daily life, on their engineering, their law, their art, have been forever silenced? Every parchment that crumbled, every scroll that burned, took with it a unique voice, a singular perspective on the human condition. The great erasures teach us a chilling lesson. Knowledge is not an immutable truth, etched in stone. It is a delicate tapestry, woven thread by painstaking thread, vulnerable to shredding by the hands of war, fanaticism, and indifference. When these libraries burned, it was not merely paper and ink that turned to ash. It was the potential of generations, the seeds of future discoveries, the very identity and memory of a people. The intellectual dark ages that followed these events were not merely periods of ignorance. They were periods of deliberate, violent forgetting, where the light of reason was actively snuffed out. The silence left by these fires is not merely the absence of sound. It is the absence of answers, the absence of continuity. It is the haunting echo of what might have been, of a different, more advanced, more enlightened human story. You are left to wonder what astonishing insights into the universe, into ourselves, into the very nature of reality, were forever consumed by the flames. The Great Erasure is a profound testament to the impermanence of even the most cherished human achievements, and a powerful call to safeguard the knowledge we still possess, understanding its profound and irreplaceable value. You stand amidst the smoldering ruins. The acrid scent of burnt papyrus and parchment still hangs heavy in the air, a sickening perfume that clings to your clothes, your hair, your very soul. Where once stood towering shelves, overflowing with the wisdom of centuries, now there is only a skeletal framework of charred timber, a monument to absence. The heat has dissipated, replaced by a cold, hollow ache that settles deep within your chest. This is not merely a building reduced to rubble. It is a universe extinguished. The initial shock has given way to a stunned, profound silence. It is a silence unlike any you have known, not peaceful, but heavy with unspoken grief and a dawning, terrible understanding. The buzzing hum of scholarly debate, the rustle of turning pages, the quiet murmuring of students copying texts, all of it is gone, replaced by the creak of settling ash and the distant, mournful cry of a bird. You look around, your eyes scanning the faces of those who share this desolate space. Their expressions mirror your own, a mixture of disbelief, despair, and a profound, wordless sorrow. These were not just walls and roofs. This was the heartbeat of their world, the repository of their collective memory. Imagine the scholars, their faces streaked with soot and tears, sifting through the debris with trembling hands. They search for anything, even a fragment, a half-burned scroll, a recognizable piece of a familiar text. But the fire was thorough, merciless. Their life's work, their passion, the very purpose that propelled them through countless sunrises and sunsets, has been reduced to fine gray powder. Their expertise, painstakingly acquired over decades, now feels like a ghostly echo, a language without words, a wisdom without texts. What do you do when the entire foundation of your knowledge, your identity, has been systematically annihilated? Where do you even begin to reconstruct a lost world when the very tools for its reconstruction are gone? The immediate aftermath extends far beyond the academic community. You walk through the city streets, and a palpable sense of confusion and disquiet hangs in the air. The marketplace is quieter, the usual clamor subdued. People speak in hushed tones or not at all, their eyes wide with uncertainty. The laws that govern their daily lives, the historical records that legitimized their rulers, the astronomical tables that guided their sailors and farmers, the medical treatises that offered cures for ailments, all had once been housed within those now ruined walls. Consider the practical implications. The city's administrators suddenly find themselves without precise records of land ownership, tax rolls, or public works projects. Disputes over boundaries and inheritance become intractable, breeding resentment and disorder. Engineers and architects, who once consulted detailed plans for aqueducts or temples, are now left to rely on imperfect memory or costly error-prone experimentation. The very infrastructure of governance and civil life begins to fray at the edges, jeopardizing stability and trust. You realize how deeply intertwined the life of the city was with the silent guardianship of its library. It was the operating system for their civilization. The loss reverberates through every aspect of human endeavor. Physicians are confronted with illnesses they once knew how to treat, but the precise remedies, the surgical techniques, the accumulated clinical observations of generations of healers, are now inaccessible. You witness the despair in their eyes as they face patients with conditions that, just days ago, might have been curable. The intellectual lineage, the chain of discovery, has been severed. It is as if an entire profession has been struck blind. Artists and poets too feel the blow. The great epic poems, the ancient myths, the dramatic plays that inspired and entertained, offered moral guidance, and shaped the cultural identity of the people, many are now gone. You hear whispers of concern that future generations will not know the stories of their ancestors, that the very essence of their shared heritage has been stolen. The collective imagination is impoverished, the wellspring of creativity diminished, as if the muses themselves have been silenced by the ash. The impact on education is catastrophic. Imagine trying to teach when there are no textbooks, no scrolls, no examples of exemplary thought or historical events. The young minds, eager to learn, are met with blank stares and half-remembered fragments. The foundational texts for philosophy, rhetoric, mathematics, and all the liberal arts are no longer there to guide them. The immediate future sees a sharp decline in literacy and critical thinking, as the next generation is denied access to the very tools that foster intellectual growth. A dark curtain descends, not over the physical world but over the landscape of the mind. This profound loss creates a void that is almost impossible to comprehend, let alone fill. There is no simple way to rebuild what has been destroyed. The knowledge contained in those volumes represented centuries of human experience, trial and error, insight and revelation. It was the accumulated wisdom of an entire civilization, patiently gathered, meticulously transcribed, and lovingly preserved. Now, that entire intellectual ecosystem has been incinerated. You feel a profound sense of isolation, a severing from the past. The continuity of human thought, the grand conversation between generations, has been violently interrupted. The vibrant intellectual life that once thrived in this place has been snuffed out, leaving behind a silence that is not peaceful, but rather a chilling testament to the fragility of human achievement. The world around you feels poorer, dimmer, as if a vital light has gone out, plunging an entire society into a bewildering intellectual darkness. This is the immediate aftermath. A world bereft, struggling to find its footing in a landscape irrevocably altered, haunted by the specter of what was lost forever. The ashes still smolder, a thick, acrid cloud clinging to the air, stinging your eyes, burning your throat. You cough, a dry, ragged sound, tasting the bitter memory of parchment and ink, of centuries dissolving into dust. You walk through the skeletal remains of what was once a majestic hall, your boots crunching on charred debris. Every step feels like a desecration, a disturbance of a fresh grave. But you are not here to mourn alone, you are here to search for ghosts. You navigate a landscape of devastation, a panorama of intellectual ruin. Columns stand like broken teeth against the sky, their stone surfaces blackened and cracked. Where shelves once stretched, laden with the weight of civilizations, now only twisted metal and heaps of fine gray powder remain. The air itself seems heavy, thick with the silence of extinguished voices, a profound absence that vibrates in your bones. You pass through what was once the philosophy section, then the great hall of histories, then the chamber of medical texts. All are equally annihilated, reduced to indistinguishable detritus. Your eyes scan the ground, hopeful, desperate for any sign of endurance. A half-burnt scroll? A clay tablet, cracked but readable? A fragment of papyrus, miraculously preserved beneath a fallen beam? You sift through the ash with gloved hands, feeling the fine grit slide between your fingers, each grain a microscopic piece of a lost world. Most of what you touch is utterly gone, transformed into an unrecognizable carbonized husk, brittle and crumbling at the slightest pressure. The sheer completeness of the destruction is a physical blow. It is as if the very idea of knowledge has been erased from this spot. Yet, amidst this vast, silent graveyard of wisdom, sometimes a flicker. Not a flame, but a faint, almost imperceptible glimmer. You might find a small leather-bound volume, its covers scorched and its pages fused into a solid block. But perhaps, just perhaps, the innermost leaves retain a shadow of their former words. You might uncover a broken piece of a wooden writing tablet, its wax coating long melted away, but the underlying wood still bearing the faint indentations of a stylus, a ghost of text etched into its grain. These are not treasures in the traditional sense. They are relics of an inferno, testaments to the destructive power of fire, and the heartbreaking fragility of human endeavors. The real survivors are rarely found here, in the heart of the conflagration. The true endurance, the enduring fragments, exist in more diffuse forms. Think of the scribe who, months or years before the fire, made a copy of a particularly vital text, and then traveled to a distant city, carrying that copy in their satchel. Imagine the smaller, less comprehensive libraries in remote towns or private collections in the homes of scholars, holding just a few dozen or a few hundred scrolls that happen to duplicate some of the lost masterpieces. These scattered, fortunate few become the unexpected anchors of what little can be salvaged. Then there is the power of human memory. A scholar, now elderly, might recall verbatim passages from a beloved poem or a key philosophical argument that existed only in the lost volumes. A storyteller might preserve in oral tradition the epic narratives that once filled the great scrolls of the history section. These are living archives, fragile and imperfect, subject to the distortions of time and retelling, but they are a form of survival nonetheless. They are whispers from the past, echoing faintly across the chasm of destruction. You understand now the true meaning of ghosts in the stacks. They are not spectral figures but the haunting absence of knowledge itself. They are the echoes of unread words, the weight of unlearned lessons, the specter of forgotten ideas. You encounter a surviving work that quotes from a lost text. This quote is a ghost, a tiny, precious fragment of a larger body, now forever inaccessible. It is like finding a single exquisite pearl from a necklace that has been utterly shattered and scattered to the winds. The pearl itself is beautiful, but its beauty is intensified by the knowledge of the magnificent chain from which it came, a chain that no longer exists. Consider the profound sadness of knowing that you hold only a part of a sentence, a single paragraph, a reference to a brilliant treatise that has vanished entirely. You grasp this fragment, this ghost of an idea, and your mind aches to reconstruct the whole, to understand the context, to follow the argument to its conclusion. But you cannot. The surrounding pages are ash. The author's full thought, their life's work, their unique contribution to human understanding is gone. You are left with a tantalizing glimpse, a promise unfulfilled. Scholars in the generations that follow will dedicate their lives to these fragments. They will meticulously gather every surviving quotation, every indirect reference, every obscure summary of a lost work. They will try to piece together the shattered mosaic of knowledge, knowing full well that many pieces are gone forever, and the full picture can never truly be restored. This painstaking work is an act of profound intellectual archaeology, a desperate attempt to commune with the ghosts of a lost library. They will become detectives of the past, searching for clues in the most unlikely places, trying to breathe life back into the shadows. Imagine the immense value placed upon a single, surviving manuscript. Before the fire, it was one among thousands, perhaps hundreds of thousands. Now it is unique, irreplaceable, a lone sentinel guarding the memory of an entire intellectual epoch. Its words, once taken for granted, now shimmer with a newfound luminescence, imbued with the weight of all that was lost. It becomes more than just a text, it becomes a monument, a survivor, a witness. Its very existence is a defiant statement against oblivion. And yet, even these surviving fragments carry with them the indelible mark of the catastrophe. They are not pristine, not whole. They are scarred, incomplete, and forever haunted by the absence of their companions. They whisper not only of what they contain, but also of the vast emptiness that surrounds them. They are a constant reminder of the fragility of knowledge, and the profound tragedy of its destruction. The world has changed forever, and even what little remained is now seen through the lens of that cataclysmic loss. The ghosts are everywhere, in what is missing, and in the precious few words that somehow, against all odds, manage to endure. You stand on the precipice of a silent chasm. The previous segment left you feeling the ghosts of what was lost, the emptiness. Now shift your focus from the immediate aftermath of the fire to the slow, insidious decay that followed for centuries, a decay of human potential. Consider the pathways that were never trodden, the ideas that never blossomed, the futures that were irrevocably altered. Imagine for a moment a different timeline, a world where the vast repositories of Alexandria, Pergamum, and countless smaller libraries had endured. You might be walking through an ancient observatory, not just a site of wonder but a functional scientific center. The sky above you not merely a canvas of stars, but a meticulously charted map, its constellations not just myths but data points. Ancient astronomers, freed from the need to rediscover basic principles, could have pushed beyond Ptolemy's geocentric model centuries earlier. Perhaps a sophisticated understanding of planetary orbits, even a nascent heliocentric theory, was within grasp, articulated in texts that turned to ash. The intricate mechanics of the cosmos, the subtle dance of gravity, might have been conceptualized not in the 17th century but in the second. Think of the telescopes that might have been built, the calculations that would have refined our understanding of the universe, all lost to the flames. You are not just missing a few books on stars, you are missing the entire trajectory of early astrophysics. Turn your gaze from the heavens to the human body. You enter a medical school, not one from the Renaissance but one that existed 2,000 years ago. In this imagined reality, the works of Hippocrates and Galen were not simply preserved and revered, but continuously challenged, expanded, and refined. Anatomical atlases, based on thousands of dissections, detailed not just the major organs but the intricate neural pathways, the vascular system, the cellular structure itself. Imagine sophisticated surgical techniques, born from centuries of incremental improvement, perhaps even an understanding of sanitation and disease transmission far beyond what we know they achieved. The development of pharmacology, drawing on an encyclopedic knowledge of plants and minerals from across the known world, could have led to treatments that would not be rediscovered until modern times. Plagues that devastated populations in the medieval period might have been mitigated, even prevented, by knowledge that simply vanished. You are not just missing a medical treatise, you are missing entire centuries of human health and longevity. Now, picture yourself in a bustling workshop, not of the industrial age but of antiquity. Here, the principles of mechanics, hydraulics, and pneumatics are not just theoretical constructs but practical applications being pushed to their limits. Heron of Alexandria's steam engine was a toy, a curiosity, a demonstration of principles. But what if the next 20 generations of engineers had access to his designs, alongside a library filled with treatises on metallurgy, material science, and kinematics? What if the Roman concrete, still standing today, was just one example of advanced material science, and other composites, stronger and lighter, were documented in texts now gone? Imagine the advancements in agriculture, irrigation systems that turned deserts green, sustainable farming practices that fed millions without depleting the soil. The very fabric of society could have been transformed by technological leaps that would not reappear until the Enlightenment or even later. You are not just missing blueprints, you are missing the physical tools and infrastructure of a more advanced ancient world. The loss was not confined to the practical sciences. It struck at the very heart of human thought. You walk among the ghostly echoes of philosophers debating, their voices carrying across the agora of a lost intellectual landscape. Imagine the complete works of Aristotle, not just the fragments we possess, but every treatise, every lecture note, every lost dialogue. Consider the many schools of philosophy that flourished in Athens, Alexandria, and Rome. Stoics, Epicureans, skeptics, cynics, Neoplatonists. We have glimpses of their rich and complex intellectual lives, but imagine the vast libraries filled with their arguments, their rebuttals, their commentaries, their entire intellectual genealogies. What competing ethical frameworks were proposed and rigorously debated? What theories of justice, governance, and human nature were explored, only to be erased from the collective memory? Perhaps the most profound philosophical loss is not the absence of specific answers, but the absence of the questions themselves. What fundamental inquiries into existence, consciousness, and reality were pursued with such intellectual rigor that they would have challenged or transformed our own understanding? The dialectic process, the constant refining of ideas through debate and critique, was profoundly stunted. Instead of building upon a complex, evolving body of knowledge, subsequent generations often had to start from scratch, rediscovering foundational concepts, re-establishing basic premises. The medieval period, often characterized by its struggles to reconcile existing fragmented knowledge, might have been an age of unprecedented intellectual acceleration if the full legacy had survived. You are not just missing books of philosophy, you are missing the very continuation of human inquiry at its highest level. Consider the diverse perspectives that perished. The libraries were not solely repositories of Greco-Roman thought. They contained translations and original works from Egyptian, Persian, Babylonian, and other traditions. These texts offered alternative epistemologies, different ways of knowing the world, distinct approaches to logic, ethics, and metaphysics. The destruction of these libraries was not merely the loss of information, it was the loss of a multifaceted intellectual conversation. The intellectual landscape became homogenized, narrowed, and impoverished. The European Dark Ages were not just a period of political fragmentation. They were an era of intellectual amnesia, where the light of past brilliance was extinguished, leaving humanity to grope in shadows, painstakingly reconstructing what was already known. The long-term effects reverberate even today. Think of the tremendous energy and intellect expended during the Renaissance, not just in creating new knowledge, but in rediscovering and translating ancient texts that had been lost for 1,000 years. Scholars like Petrarch, Pico della Mirandola, and Erasmus dedicated their lives to piecing together fragments, often having to relearn ancient languages to access what little remained. This was a monumental effort, a heroic act of recovery, but it also represents a colossal detour, a 1,000-year setback. What if that energy, that intellectual horsepower, could have been directed toward entirely new frontiers of knowledge, building on a robust, unbroken chain of discovery? You realize that humanity was forced to retrace its steps, to climb mountains that had already been summited, simply because the maps were burned. Concepts that were nearly grasped, theories that were on the cusp of formulation, entire fields of inquiry that were just beginning to coalesce, all vanished. The world we inhabit today, with its scientific achievements and philosophical insights, is a world built on a foundation that had to be painstakingly reconstructed from fragments, a foundation forever missing crucial cornerstones. We are not just standing on the shoulders of giants, we are standing on the shoulders of ghosts, wondering what greater heights we might have reached if their full legacy had been preserved. The unwritten future, the potential paths for humanity, were not simply delayed, they were fundamentally altered. The destruction of these libraries created a profound intellectual void, a silence that echoes across millennia. It forced humanity into a long period of intellectual regression, followed by a slow, arduous process of rediscovery, a constant struggle against the tide of oblivion. You feel the weight of this lost potential, the roads not taken, the grand symphony of human intellect that was abruptly silenced, leaving only scattered, haunting notes. The world you inhabit is a testament to human resilience, but also a constant reminder of the profound and irreversible tragedy of lost knowledge. It is a world forever shaped by what did not happen, by the futures that were systematically unwritten. You stand on the edge of a precipice, not of rock or earth, but of time itself. Behind you stretches a world shaped by absence, by the great silence where human genius was once articulated, then abruptly muted. Now you peer into the shadows, into the ghostly outlines of innovations that vanished, discoveries that once pulsed with the promise of a different future. Imagine the very air crackling with ingenuity, with the hum of machines never quite perfected, theories never fully tested, remedies never widely applied. You are walking through the hallowed halls of an ancient library, not the one you know from history books, but the one that existed in its fullest glory before the flames. The scent of papyrus and leather is thick in the air, mingled with the faint, metallic tang of ink. Your fingers brush against a scroll, brittle with age, yet still holding the intricate diagrams of a device far ahead of its time. This is not mere speculation. This is the echo of a profound truth. The Antikythera mechanism, that astonishingly complex astronomical calculator salvaged from the sea, is a tantalizing whisper from this lost world, a concrete example of a technology so advanced that its very existence challenges the conventional timeline of human progress. Now imagine its brethren. Imagine for a moment that you are a scholar in Alexandria, perhaps a millennium and a half before what is known as the European Renaissance. You are not only reading Plato and Aristotle, you are studying detailed schematics for steam-powered automata, not mere toys but prototypes for practical applications. You pore over treatises on optics that describe lenses capable of magnifying the distant stars with unparalleled clarity, perhaps even predicting the existence of new planets or the true nature of celestial mechanics centuries before Galileo. You might be reviewing medical texts that detail surgical procedures, sanitation practices, and pharmacological compounds that could have eradicated diseases that plagued humanity for millennia, preventing countless deaths and untold suffering across the globe. Think of the architects and engineers. You see blueprints for earthquake-resistant structures, urban planning strategies that prioritize sanitation and efficient resource management, grand public works that far outstripped those that eventually defined the Roman Empire. Perhaps there were forgotten methods of concrete manufacturing, stronger and more durable than anything we rediscovered until quite recently. What about advanced irrigation systems, or techniques for sustainable agriculture that could have fed larger populations more efficiently, preventing famines and spurring urban growth? You might be examining texts detailing unique methods of metal alloy production, creating materials with unheard of strength or flexibility, perhaps even forms of ancient, rudimentary electrical conductors. The lost knowledge extended far beyond the purely technical. You find yourself among philosophical treatises that explored ethics, governance, and psychology with a depth that would astound modern thinkers. Imagine works that presented fully formed democratic ideals, or complex sociological analyses of human behavior and societal structures, thousands of years before the Enlightenment. Perhaps there were schools of thought that offered different pathways to understanding the human mind, leading to early forms of psychotherapy or comprehensive educational philosophies that fostered creativity and critical thinking on a universal scale. You discover histories of civilizations that are utterly unknown to you, entire empires and cultures that flourished and faded without leaving a trace in the historical record you are familiar with. Imagine first-hand accounts of ancient voyages to distant continents, challenging the accepted narratives of exploration and connectivity. You might uncover lost literary masterpieces, epic poems, and profound dramas that offered alternative perspectives on the human condition, enriching the global tapestry of storytelling in ways we can only now dimly perceive. Entire genres of art, music, and performance might have been chronicled, their techniques and theories meticulously preserved, only to vanish into the smoke of forgotten fires. The obliteration of these libraries was not merely the loss of books, it was the annihilation of entire branches of human intellectual evolution. It was akin to pruning a magnificent tree not just of its leaves, but of its very root system and nascent shoots. The process of rediscovery, which you now attribute to the Renaissance or the Enlightenment, becomes in this light a slow, often painful reblossoming from a stump, rather than a continuous, accelerating ascent. The knowledge you hold today might, in another timeline, have been considered elementary, a basic foundation built upon centuries ago, allowing humanity to reach far greater intellectual and technological heights by now. You feel a chilling sense of profound absence as you consider this. Imagine the implications for medicine, cures for diseases discovered and lost, only to reappear centuries later to plague new generations. Imagine for engineering, efficient designs for machines or structures that had to be reinvented from scratch, consuming precious resources and time. What about astronomy, physics, chemistry? Fundamental principles, painstakingly derived and documented, wiped clean from the slate, forcing humanity to grope in the dark for what was once illuminated. The burning of these libraries was not a simple tragedy, it was a systematic dismantling of humanity's progress. It created a colossal intellectual vacuum, a void that stalled scientific advancement for centuries. The Dark Ages, often characterized by a perceived decline in learning, now feel less like an inevitable phase and more like a direct consequence, a forced intellectual winter brought about by the destruction of the fertile ground that came before. The burning scrolls were not just paper and ink. They were the collective memory, the compiled wisdom, the very blueprints for a more advanced civilization. You begin to understand that when a library like Alexandria burned, it was not just one fire but 1,000 fires. It was the burning of countless hours of diligent study, years of meticulous experimentation, lifetimes of profound contemplation. It was the extinguishing of debates, the silencing of voices, the erasure of discoveries. The true cost is immeasurable, not just in what was lost, but in what was never allowed to come into being because its foundational knowledge was annihilated. Consider the ripple effect. An innovation that might have saved millions of lives, if only its principles had survived and been disseminated. A philosophical concept that could have averted centuries of conflict, if only it had been widely understood and adopted. A technological leap that could have solved fundamental energy or resource problems, if only its schematics had been preserved. You see not just shadows of lost books, but the shadows of lost possibilities, lost futures, stretching out behind you like an infinite, mournful echo. Sometimes, in the modern world, you catch a glimpse of this lost brilliance. A scientist makes a groundbreaking discovery, only to find ancient texts hinting at a similar understanding, a parallel path that was explored and then abandoned. An engineer invents a novel mechanism, and then unearths evidence of its ancient precursor, revealing a forgotten lineage of innovation. These moments are not merely coincidences. They are echoes across the chasm of lost time, proof that certain truths, certain inventive pathways, are inherently discoverable and were indeed discovered before. But how many such pathways remain undiscovered simply because the breadcrumbs leading to them were incinerated? How many problems that vex humanity today had solutions centuries ago, locked away in a scroll that turned to ash? You cannot help but feel the weight of this unknowing, the burden of potential futures that were systematically unwritten. The world you inhabit today, with all its marvels, feels almost like a partial resurrection, a phoenix rising from too much ash, its full majesty forever diminished by the irreplaceable losses of its past. The ancient libraries, therefore, were not just repositories of information, they were crucibles of human potential. Their destruction was a catastrophic wound to the collective human intellect, an amputation of future possibilities. You are left with a profound sense of wonder, tinged with sorrow, imagining the vibrant, technologically advanced and philosophically rich societies that might have flourished had those shadows of innovation been allowed to fully emerge into the light. Their absence continues to shape your reality, a constant, silent reminder of the brilliance that once was, and the world that might have been. But how many such pathways remain undiscovered simply because the breadcrumbs leading to them were incinerated? How many problems that vex humanity today had solutions centuries ago, locked away in a scroll that turned to ash? You cannot help but feel the weight of this unknowing, the burden of potential futures that were systematically unwritten. The world you inhabit today, with all its marvels, feels almost like a partial resurrection, a phoenix rising from too much ash, its full majesty forever diminished by the irreplaceable losses of its past. The ancient libraries, therefore, were not just repositories of information, they were crucibles of human potential. Their destruction was a catastrophic wound to the collective human intellect, an amputation of future possibilities. You are left with a profound sense of wonder, tinged with sorrow, imagining the vibrant, technologically advanced and philosophically rich societies that might have flourished had those shadows of innovation been allowed to fully emerge into the light. Their absence continues to shape your reality, a constant, silent reminder of the brilliance that once was, and the world that might have been. But the story does not end with a lament of what was lost. Human spirit, ever resilient, always seeks to mend, to reclaim, to rebuild. You are living in an era where the ghost of those lost libraries inspires a monumental, global endeavor. A modern quest to preserve the knowledge that remains and to painstakingly reconstruct what has vanished. This is a journey driven by both necessity and a profound sense of aspiration, a determination to safeguard our collective inheritance. You might think that after centuries of loss, the task is simply to mourn. Yet, you find yourself at the forefront of an unprecedented effort, one that leverages both ancient patience and cutting-edge technology. Imagine the digital archives you interact with daily, the vast repositories of information accessible with a mere tap. These are, in a very real sense, the Alexandrian libraries of your time, reimagined and redistributed. Millions of books, manuscripts, and documents, once confined to dusty shelves in remote corners of the world, are now being digitized. You can call up ancient papyri, medieval illuminated texts, and the first printed editions of classic works with a speed that would utterly astonish any ancient scholar. This immense undertaking is not without its own challenges, of course. You might pause to consider the fragility of the digital realm. What happens when file formats become obsolete? When servers crash? When power grids fail? The very technologies designed to protect knowledge introduce new vulnerabilities. You are living through the birth of a new kind of digital dark age, where information can vanish not in fire, but in a flicker of code. The modern archivist faces a constant battle against link rot, data degradation, and the relentless march of technological obsolescence. It is a preservation effort on a scale previously unimaginable, yet it carries the echoes of the ancient struggle to keep scrolls from crumbling or ink from fading. Beyond the digital frontier, the physical preservation of existing artifacts continues with unwavering dedication. You can picture the specialized conservation laboratories, where experts meticulously restore ancient manuscripts, repairing tears, stabilizing brittle pages, and deciphering faint inscriptions. Here, in climate-controlled vaults, away from the destructive forces of light, humidity, and pests, a different kind of vigilance is maintained. Every fragment, every scrap of papyrus, every parchment is treated as an invaluable clue to a larger, often incomplete, puzzle. The very smell of old paper and the gentle rustle of a turning page speak to the continuity of human thought across millennia. Then there is the thrilling, painstaking work of reconstruction. Imagine yourself as a textual detective, poring over disparate fragments, cross-referencing citations in later works, and analyzing translations into other languages. This is the work of philologists and classicists around the globe. They piece together glimpses of lost plays, philosophical treatises, and scientific observations that were once believed to be utterly gone. Sometimes the discovery of a single new papyrus scroll can shed light on an entire lost work, offering a tantalizing window into the minds of thinkers whose voices were silenced centuries ago. You can feel the quiet excitement that ripples through the scholarly community with each such find, a tiny phoenix rising from the ashes of time. Consider the ongoing archaeological endeavors that continue to unearth new evidence. Every excavation site holds the potential to reveal not just artifacts, but also inscriptions, ostraca, and even more scrolls. You might imagine the moment when a buried library, perhaps miraculously preserved like those at Herculaneum, could be found. What untold treasures might still lie beneath the earth, waiting to be rediscovered? The very thought ignites a profound sense of hope and urgency, fueling expeditions and research projects across continents. This modern quest is not just about the texts themselves, but about the spirit of the institutions that once housed them. You are seeing a renewed appreciation for the role of libraries, both physical and virtual, as vital centers of learning, community, and intellectual exchange. Public libraries today, while perhaps less grand than the ancient Mouseion of Alexandria, still serve as crucial hubs of knowledge access, striving to bridge the digital divide and ensure that information remains freely available to all. Universities and research institutions worldwide actively foster interdisciplinary collaboration, mirroring the collaborative spirit that must have existed in the great scholarly centers of antiquity. The aspiration, then, is not merely to recover what was lost, but to build something more resilient, more distributed, and ultimately more enduring. You are witnessing attempts to create a global knowledge network that is less susceptible to a single point of failure, whether by fire, war, or neglect. The lessons learned from the ancient catastrophes deeply inform current strategies for safeguarding information. This includes not just digital backups, but also diversified storage solutions, international cooperation, and a deep ethical commitment to intellectual freedom and open access. Yet, you must also acknowledge that new threats emerge. The censorship of information, the spread of misinformation, the deliberate destruction of cultural heritage in conflict zones. These are modern echoes of ancient acts of barbarism. The fight to preserve knowledge is therefore a perpetual one, requiring constant vigilance and renewed effort. It reminds you that the fragility of human achievement is a timeless truth. You are part of a generation that has inherited the profound responsibility to carry forward this torch of knowledge. The burning of the ancient libraries serves as a stark warning, a constant reminder of the preciousness of every single scroll, every single book, every single byte of data. It urges you to engage in the acts of preservation, interpretation, and creation, ensuring that the collective wisdom of humanity continues to grow, to be shared, and to inspire future generations. The quest is ongoing, a boundless horizon stretching before you, beckoning you to contribute to the grand library of human experience, a library that, with your help, will never truly burn to ash again. You stand at the precipice of this hopeful vision, imagining a grand library of human experience, unassailable, ever-growing. But the ashes of Alexandria, of Nalanda, of countless forgotten repositories of thought, whisper a chilling caveat. They remind you that while the quest to build and preserve is noble and necessary, the lesson itself is unending. The vulnerability of human wisdom is not merely a historical footnote, but an enduring truth, an inherent fragility woven into the very fabric of our collective consciousness. Consider the nature of this fragility. It is not simply the physical vulnerability of papyrus to flame or ink to water. It runs deeper into the human heart and mind, into the very societal structures we erect. You walk through the shadowed aisles of history again, not just seeing the flames, but understanding the hands that lit them, the minds that commanded their kindling, and the indifference that allowed them to rage. Think of the conquest. You are there as an army sweeps through a city, its primary objective not just territory but the subjugation of a culture. What better way to erase a people than to erase their story, their science, their philosophy? The Great Library of Pergamum, a rival to Alexandria in its ambition and scope, saw its collection diminish not solely by fire, but by political maneuver and the shifting tides of power, with significant portions reportedly carted away, assimilated, or lost to the chaos of conflict. The Roman Empire, in its expansion, often absorbed or sometimes destroyed the intellectual treasures of its conquered lands, valuing utility and order over what it sometimes perceived as esoteric or challenging thought. Then you witness the purges. Imagine the fervor of a new ideology taking hold, a new religion, a new political doctrine. Everything that predates it, everything that contradicts it, everything that offers an alternative worldview becomes a threat. You feel the cold certainty of those who believe they possess the ultimate truth, and therefore, everything else is heresy and impurity to be cleansed. Think of the methodical destruction of Maya codices by Spanish conquistadors, driven by religious zeal. These were not random acts of vandalism, but systematic campaigns to eradicate an entire civilization's history, cosmology, and scientific understanding, replacing it with a new imposed narrative. Only a handful survived, tantalizing glimpses into a vast, deliberately extinguished intellectual universe. You stand by as the Library of Baghdad, the House of Wisdom, is sacked by the Mongols in the 13th century. It is not just a building that falls. It is centuries of accumulated knowledge in medicine, astronomy, mathematics, and philosophy, much of it preserved and advanced by Islamic scholars while Europe was in its so-called Dark Ages. The story tells of the Tigris River running black with ink from countless books and red with blood. This was not merely the loss of texts. It was the severance of intellectual lineages, the disruption of continuous inquiry, the silencing of voices that had spoken across generations. The very thought process, the methodology of knowledge building, was thrown into disarray. And what about neglect? You walk into a once vibrant scriptorium, now silent, dusty. The scrolls are left unrolled, exposed to humidity, insects, time itself. The patrons have gone, the scholars dispersed, the funding dried up. This is not the dramatic blaze of a catastrophic fire, but the slow, insidious decay of apathy. The libraries of antiquity, even those not targeted by direct assault, faced the relentless enemy of time and environmental degradation. Papyrus is fragile, parchment susceptible, and without constant copying, restoration, and care, even the most monumental collections would inevitably fade. Think of the millions of ancient Greek and Latin texts now lost to us, not because of a single dramatic event, but because the continuous, labor-intensive process of preservation eventually broke down. This quiet, unheralded loss speaks volumes about the human tendency to take what is inherited for granted, to assume its permanence until it is irrevocably gone. This brings you to the core of the unending lesson. Human wisdom is perpetually fragile because human nature itself is perpetually flawed. The capacity for enlightenment and reason coexists with the capacity for tribalism, fanaticism, and short-sightedness. The same species that builds the libraries also burns them. The same species that cherishes knowledge can also, in moments of fear or greed or hubris, choose ignorance. You see this fragility echoed in the contemporary world. While literal book burnings are rarer, you witness the burning of ideas, the deliberate obfuscation of facts, the erosion of critical thinking. You hear the shouts of those who seek to silence dissenting voices, to declare certain narratives as the only acceptable truth, to rewrite history to suit present agendas. This is the ideological fire, often more subtle than physical flame, but no less destructive to the collective wisdom. Consider the digital age. You might think our knowledge is safer now, distributed across countless servers, instantly accessible. But the digital realm introduces new vulnerabilities. Data decay, link rot, the obsolescence of file formats, the fragility of cloud storage that relies on commercial entities, the ever-present threat of cyber attack, the deliberate spread of misinformation at unprecedented scale. These are the modern equivalents of water-damaged scrolls and forgotten papyri. The sheer volume of information can itself be overwhelming, making discernment difficult, creating a fertile ground for the weeds of falsehood to choke out the crops of truth. The enduring fragility of human wisdom means that the battle for knowledge is never truly won. Each generation must fight it anew. You are called not just to preserve the past, but to actively cultivate the future. This means engaging with difficult ideas, questioning assumptions, protecting the spaces where open inquiry can flourish, and defending the institutions that champion truth and reason. It means understanding that knowledge is not a static inheritance but a dynamic conversation, constantly needing tending, challenge, and defense. It implies a humility too. The greatest minds of antiquity, despite their vast libraries, understood how much they did not know. True wisdom lies not just in the accumulation of facts, but in the acknowledgement of ignorance, the openness to new perspectives, and the willingness to revise one's understanding. When we believe we have all the answers, when we close ourselves off to further learning, that is precisely when our wisdom becomes most fragile, most susceptible to ideological rigidity and eventual collapse. The unending lesson is this: the fires that consumed the ancient libraries were not just external forces. They were often reflections of internal human failings. The lust for power, the fear of difference, the comfort of dogma over the challenge of inquiry. These human tendencies persist. They are part of your inheritance. Therefore, the task is not merely to build a better firewall around our digital archives, or to construct more resilient physical libraries. The task is to cultivate resilience within ourselves, within our communities, within our societies. It means fostering intellectual courage, promoting empathy, and championing the painstaking, often messy work of truth-seeking. It means recognizing that every time we allow misinformation to spread unchecked, every time we dismiss expertise without consideration, every time we suppress a voice for convenience, we are, in a small but significant way, striking a match. You carry this weight of history, this profound responsibility. The lesson of the burning libraries is not one of despair, but of perpetual vigilance. It is a call to action, reminding you that the preservation of human wisdom is not a passive act of storage, but an active, ongoing struggle that demands your constant engagement, your critical thought, and your unwavering commitment to the light of knowledge. It is a light that always flickers, always susceptible to the winds of human folly, and thus always in need of your diligent guardianship.